I want to speak to people who they aren't experiencing success. They have low drive because of some pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different
Yep.
conversation.
Yep.
How do we encourage them today?
I would say, again, if shame is the thing that is keeping you small, if shame is the thing that's telling you that there's no point trying, don't bother, no one's going to listen, your voice isn't important, you've got low self-worth. To me, shame, again, like trauma and shame aren't discriminating. It's really obviously got a hold of you. And there is a cure for shame. Hallelujah. But it is self-compassion. And it's very hard to generate self-compassion. It's much easier to have empathy for another. There's an exercise that I often suggest for people, which is if you're struggling to find compassion for the self, which we do because when we think about us, so there's an event from your childhood and you think maybe there's some shame from that. Certainly for me, there was a violent episode with my father, and even though I knew it was wrong, he punched me in the face in a restaurant when I was 7 years old. And then we were on a holiday at the time in Spain, and I had a nosebleed. And getting back to the hotel room, my mother was in the hotel room. And when we got back, they sort of looked awkwardly at each other. And then boys at school beginning to get nosebleeds in like adolescence in the class. And I'd obviously been talking about it. And they both kind of looked at me and went, well, you did say you'd never had a nosebleed before. A bit like, well, you did say you wanted a puppy for Christmas. And I can remember looking at them thinking, this is really wrong. But what can I do? I'm in Spain. This is like the late 80s. I can't do anything. I can't leave. You're my caregivers. I have to placate. I have to try and be a good girl. And this feels really horrible, but I have to do this. And I just want to say to people that have got some shame, I knew that that was wrong. I rationally knew that was wrong. I thought about that every day of my life until I had the EMDR session. And even though I could recount it and I knew that happening was wrong, there was a part of me that's like, oh, but maybe you did chat back. Or maybe you shouldn't have said that. If only you hadn't have said that at the dinner table, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Now, an exercise I want to offer to people, and the reason this is relevant is I keep a picture of my daughter who's 8, but I keep a picture of her in my office at 7 because that's the age that I was. And I reran that incident with her in that seat. And it makes me feel emotional to think about it. And that's just me imagining it. There is nothing that girl could say or do that would warrant any violence, even violent language towards her, not one thing. And that reaction that I had, that feeling, that's the compassion I needed to give myself. That was the permission I needed to give myself. So I want to offer that to the audience and to anyone here is that if you're struggling, because there's that little voice going, oh, well, maybe you did do this or you shouldn't have done that or why did you do this? Run the scenario again. Your child, a niece or nephew, a friend's kid, if it's an adult situation, put your best friend in that scenario, run it for me again, and you tell me if there's anything they could have done differently or should have done differently. And please use that compassion for yourself. So if someone's got very low self-worth, low drive, and probably are overrun by shame and exhausted by it, to your point earlier, please use that exercise and start building that well of self-compassion.
Are there any signs that we haven't talked about for maybe the unwitting person who's dealing with some shame or even trauma, didn't realize that it's affecting them like trauma? Maybe they think, well, this was a bad experience in my life. Are there any signs, telltale signs that maybe we haven't discussed? I
would say if you're sometimes emotional volatility, like if people are saying, I can't manage my emotions, there's usually something underneath that. Outbursts, we could say either way, emotional, anger. Also people that dissociate, and which is a sort of safety mechanism that we learn perhaps in childhood. It's just we just dissociate from our emotions. So perhaps if people are feeling very numb, and then I would say perhaps more obviously, but if people are choosing an exit and from their lives or reality, and you might think, well, that could be drugs or alcohol, but actually it can be work. It can be exercise. It can be things that you're celebrated for. Oh, they're at the office, they're working so hard, they're building this. But all of those things can still be you avoiding your life. You're not being intimate in friendships or relationship. You're not really showing up. I mean, the hot potato example I gave earlier is a good one where my partner, he's 53, he's great. And unfortunately, very sadly, over the last couple of years, 2 of his very close friends have taken their own lives, men in their early 50s. And he, as people often say, the last person you'd expect, always so happy, always asking about you, but didn't know what was going on with them. They keep you away from their shame. They chat, they're there, they're asking questions, but you don't really know what's happening inside. So it is really, really important to talk, and I want to emphasize that point, but it's also really important to ask and listen. How are you? What's going on?